The following program is intended for mature audiences.
Rudy's Revelation.
I don't really care, Margaret. I don't really care, Margaret.
The New World Order.
This is a conspiracy.
Hey everyone, welcome to the podcast. It is Friday. Happy Friday. It's the end of January 31st. So yesterday I didn't talk about the plane crash because there was nothing to talk about. Well, today there is. So apparently there is a conspiracy behind the plane crash. And we're going to talk about that today because yesterday I talked about the resistance from the establishment is building, and we're going to see exactly what that consists of today, Friday, January 31st, 2025. All right, let's get into the news. All right, we're going to start off with the Wall Street Journal opinion from Peggy Noonan. You might know Peggy Noonan. She's a longtime Wall Street Journal columnist. And I'm going to start here with what we understand as being the conspiracy. Peggy says a disquieting Washington leaves me with the sense that America is making a big break from the past. We're not any further away from the truth in this is that the New World Order, the old world order, as Peggy Noonan calls it, we're not just making a break from the past technologically, which is obvious. But what we are doing is we are making a break from the elite combine, which has had control really of the world, but particularly of the most powerful nation in the world, the United States. And we're going back to a republic, a government, a free government controlled by the people, citizenry. So let's kind of paint a picture today. We're going to start with this other article from the Wall Street Journal. Trump, facing two crises in his second week, spreads the blame around. Second week shows how an administration moving at lightning speed deals with sudden challenges by going on the offense. Now, what they're talking about is Trump's blame game, and I'm going to get into that a little bit here as well. But we're going to start off by what the mainstream media is saying. So, first off, the Irish Star is reporting Elon Musk pressured FAA boss to quit 1 week before Potomac River plane crash. During the press conference, the secretary and DC fire chief refused to answer the question about whether or not this FAA boss, the Federal Aviation Administration, was actually a DEI hire, was not involved in as being the head of tower controls and general staffing of the FAA. General staffing, not DEI staffing. At least that's my understanding. New York Times reports staffing was not normal at Reagan airport tower, according to FAA report. The report reviewed by the New York Times said one controller was communicating with both helicopters and planes. Both jobs are typically assigned to two people, not one. And what I'm trying to paint the picture for you today is the fact that what they're trying to do, there are two. What you have to understand about conspiracy is that the parties involved have to have motive and wherewithal. So we're going to talk about that. But right now we're going into the cover story, which of course is President Trump in his rush to gut staffing, particularly DEI. Basically, what Trump is doing is undermining everything that the establishment had been doing over the past 6 years, perhaps, maybe even longer. It was in the works for some time, but they were getting it ready. So as soon as they had their coup with Biden in 2020, that they could put it all into place. They used COVID, and then under the trauma of COVID, they institute these ridiculous policies involving transgender folks and people of color, particularly that they are oppressed or attacked, and the Republicans are racist, and they weave this idea that your ills are based on racist Republicans, and that's just a way to turn the electorate against one political party, conservative party. Okay. So what they're doing is they're setting it up now and saying that Trump, in all his haste, has undermined staffing, crucial staffing, that is posing a great risk to the public. That is the idea. Let's go to the next article by the Wall Street Journal. Oh my God, what air traffic radio tells us about the American Airlines plane crash. Transmission show early instruction for Army helicopter to avoid passenger jet. Now, if you might not have seen or heard the actual radio communication, I delved into it quite a bit. And what we do know is that supposedly the helicopter was warned. The flight path doesn't suggest anything of the sort. If you look at the radar, if you look at the actual video, you'll see that the helicopter doesn't slow down, doesn't change altitude, doesn't do anything. If anything, it looked like he gained speed. So, and there is some missing links about the less qualified pilot that was possibly piloting the plane. So, what we're going to understand here, let's talk about it. So, the word was separation. Will you have separate? And what separation is the space between aircraft. Always is the separation. And by law, there's a certain amount of separation you need to have. So let's go on with the story or the narrative of the mainstream media. And I said this from the beginning. Whatever the false flag is, they're going to have a pre-scripted media response that's going to go out verbatim, which it did. It's Trump's fault. It's Elon Musk's fault. They're doing this too quickly. And the reason for all this, the reason for this false flag is to upend the confirmation of RFK, Kash Patel, and particularly of Tulsi Gabbard, which we have found out is the person that the establishment fears the most. Now, this should certainly be of concern to folks. So let's talk about that, shall we? Okay, so the Daily Mail says, wild conspiracy theorists suggest Blackhawk chopper's crash with American Airlines jet was deliberate, and they say because people online say military helicopters don't fly into planes. Before I go into the article, what you have to understand is that the pilots of the military helicopter could have been wearing night vision. Why they would is unlikely, is unknown. There's no reason to wear night vision goggles unless you are viewing things on the ground, which in that sort of scenario you wouldn't be. However, if you've ever been in an aircraft, there are windows all around, so you could look all around. So the fact that the military helicopter didn't see the plane is unlikely, particularly in that airspace, which is the approach to the friggin' runway 33. All right, let's see what the Daily Mail has to say. Conspiracy theorists have rushed to social media to place uncorroborated blame on the U.S. government, suggesting the collision might have been intentional because military helicopters don't fly into planes. Some allege the helicopter appeared to chase, now this is important, appeared to chase the bombardier plane as it approached for landing, comparing the scene to the 1970s style assassination. Goes on to say, the plane crash is so strange, something is off. A Blackhawk not having alarms going, 3 soldiers not seeing an effing commercial plane, an Army pilot that doesn't understand how to navigate close to an airport, even in training. Yes, something smells bad. Another user echoed the claim, arguing that helicopters do not crash into airplanes and airplanes do not crash into helicopters. Ain't no way. Somebody needs to check out who was on the plane or allegedly in the helicopter. This smells bad. This looks deliberate to me. Watch the clip, especially in slow motion. The plane is coming in to land and the helicopter comes in from the left and flies straight into it. Straight into it. Another added, crazy this how this even happened. Helicopters are so easily maneuvered compared to a plane. In the video, it looks like he drives right into the plane without trying to turn. Super weird and tragic. I find it hard to believe that an Army helicopter didn't have enough intel to avoid this, without a doubt. And the reason in being is that helicopters can stop pretty much on a dime. All you have to do is kick back on those pedals, or can slow down, can hover, can speed up. They're so maneuverable that if you look, as I mentioned earlier, here comes the plane and the helicopter flies straight into it. Not at an angle, not on the side, it looks like somebody is deliberately flying the helicopter into the plane. This is the point of impact over the Potomac. The diagram here shows Ronald Reagan Washington National Airport, where the plane was making an approach. And the helicopter flying along the river, as they often do, flew right into the plane. So if you delve into that, if you do your research, you'll find out that the tower called off the other 3 or 4 planes that were also making an approach. So if you've ever witnessed how planes approach, they get into a holding pattern and they fly around the airport and they line up to do their approach. So one will fly in and then the other one with separation will fly in behind it, and then another one, and then another one, and then another one. They line up and they land on the same runway, one after another. That's how it's done. So if you look at the radar, the tower calls off the other 3 or 4 that were still making their approach and were able to abort because of the helicopter. The helicopter wasn't responding, and that it flew directly into one of those planes. All right. More news from Fox News. 2 planes aborted landing at DCA due to helicopters in flight path a week before crash. Military helicopter flight paths, around Reagan National Airport face renewed scrutiny after deadly collision with a commercial flight. Now, what the Fox News story doesn't mention is one of these incidents wasn't a week before, it was a day before. That it looked like a military helicopter tried to fly into a commercial jet just a day before. And the commercial jet took evasive action to avoid the helicopter. So it almost seems as if they tried this the day before and did it unsuccessfully. The very next day, this happened. Washington Post is reporting helicopters flying along Potomac frequently pose danger to passing jets. So they're setting up the plausible deniability. So with every narrative that could go sideways, you have to have plausible deniability. So let's take COVID, for example. COVID was a zoonotic transmission from bat soup or something, or a pangolin. That doesn't fly. So your plausible deniability is, oh, it did leak out of a biolab, but it wasn't released. So you have different layers of deceit. So the plausible deniability is, well, this happens all the time. This danger existed and could happen anytime. So they're already going to their plausible deniability, which means their initial, which they will still press, their initial narrative is Donald Trump is to blame. Either or, the fact is it's distracting attention away from the hearings and the confirmation votes of these very important people that during the hearings, information is coming out that they don't want the general public to know. People are talking about the FBI January 6th. People are talking about Kash Patel's attacks, racist attacks on Kash Patel by government officials. And I'll get to that in just a second. As well as there's certain things, particularly Tulsi Gabbard was talking about, which is the chemical attacks supposedly linked to Bashar al-Assad in Syria, and Edward Snowden, and what exactly Edward Snowden divulged. As I said, Edward Snowden is a whistleblower, and that he uncovered illegality being conducted, illegal behavior, illegal action by the federal government and their agencies, including Booz Hamilton. All right, so Zero Hedge is reporting Trump says DC Blackhawk was flying too high by a lot. President Trump has claimed, confirming the altitude of the Blackhawk was too high. Confirming, according to Zero Hedge, because what we know is, what we've found out with news reporting is Blackhawk's ceiling is about 250 feet. This Blackhawk was flying at 350 feet, 100 feet above where you're supposed to be. Now, I had claimed that the Blackhawk actually gained altitude at the time of the crash, specifically to try to hit the plane. If you look again at the video and the radar, it looks like somebody's steering the helicopter into the plane. It actually looks like it gains speed as well. All right. Setting this up, and there's a lot of news to get through, but what we have to understand is the context. So what I'm going to get to now is a little known story about automobile hacking. Now, what is automobile hacking? It is similar to what I'm going to point out here in just a second. That is extremely important, but I have to lay out the context. So in 2013, I'm just going to describe it. You could search these names. There are two names you need to search. Michael Hastings, who was a reporter for Rolling Stone that exposed certain things a certain general was doing in Afghanistan that he shouldn't have been doing, that caused great embarrassment to the U.S., to the Pentagon. He was working on another story involving the CIA, and he claimed he was being followed. And then in 2013, in June of 2013, his car went speeding down the road and seemed to explode at 2 a.m, and he said he was being chased by the FBI. The engine of the car he was driving flew 100 feet away from the car. He had spoken to a neighbor and friend recently. This reporter did, Michael Hastings, that he saw somebody monkeying around with his car, and he asked her if she would be willing to switch cars. She didn't. Also, Michael Hastings' wife, who was involved in intelligence, I think at the State Department, mysteriously died. I think it was a month or two after his article about, I think it was McChrystal, General McChrystal in Afghanistan. So is that shaping up for you? So he died of a mysterious car accident in 2013. In October of 2013, a woman in the state I live in, Miriam Carey, seemed to or was accused of driving her car all the way to Washington, D.C., and crashing through the checkpoints at the White House. She drove her car during the incident as she's being chased around by Capitol Police and Secret Service like she's a stunt car driver, pulling J-turns, accelerating at high rates of speed, and commanding her car with great maneuverability that you would only see from a stunt driver or somebody who's a professional driver. Supposedly, she did all this with her infant son in the back. So many of us claim that she was actually kidnapped by her car and driven to the Capitol. And the kidnappers who locked the doors and drove the car to Washington, D.C. from Connecticut were unaware that there was the child was still in the back seat. The child was supposed to be dropped off, I believe, at her parents' house in New York City. In any case, these are two incidents that people within the conspiracy realm claim that these cars of Michael Hastings and Miriam Carey were hijacked in 2013. All right, let's go to 2013 quickly. Hacking under the hood. This is from NPR and Into Your Car. Automakers are making cars smarter by including more computerized features, but these features are also opening up cars to hackers. BBC News, July of 2013. Car hackers use laptop to control standard car. Forbes magazine, December of 2019. Oh, this is actually July 2013. Excuse me. July 2013. Forbes, hackers reveal nasty new car attacks with me behind the wheel. This is Andy Greenberg. Now, this is from a week ago, not even a week ago, 5 days ago, from Forbes as well. Cybersecurity threats to modern cars, how hackers are taking control. It's PC Magazine. This is back in July of 2015. Hackers remotely hijacked Jeep. Now, this was a well-publicized in 2015, and this is when people started saying, hey, these people, Michael Hastings and Miriam Carey, could possibly have been carjacked by their car. So this is when it was publicly researchers Charlie Miller and Chris Balasek recently took Wired writer Andy Greenberg on a ride he won't soon forget, and that was his car was hijacked by hackers. Auto Revolution. This one was just 4 days ago. Hackers found a way to control Subaru cars over the internet without drivers even knowing. Now let's get to the crux of the matter and this air crash in Washington, D.C. This is military news from October of last year. Sikorsky, which I know well, in Connecticut, to install autonomous control system on U.S. Army Blackhawk helicopters. The modernization of Blackhawk with the Elias Matrix system from DARPA and Sikorsky will allow the U.S. Army to explore the potential of a autonomous control. The Aviation Nest also reports DARPA awards Sikorsky $6 million contract to equip U.S. Army Blackhawk with advanced autonomy. This is, again, of October of last year. Hartford Business Journal, right here in Connecticut, October 17th, who broke the story. Sikorsky to install remote flight capabilities in new Blackhawk model. Aviation Today. DARPA's remote-controlled Blackhawk. Now, this story dates back 2018, so 6 years ago. So this is what I want to say. It's the same thing with remote controlling motor vehicles. The same thing I'm going to talk about now is the technology that the government has is about 30 years before public knowledge. Okay, but we can demonstrate here that DARPA's remote control Blackhawk from this article in November of 2018 is 6 years before the Hartford Business Times broke the story in Connecticut, and then was followed by the other military news, etc. And so Lockheed Martin, who controls Sikorsky, echoed the recent October 2024 news that command an autonomous Blackhawk helicopter from 300 miles away. So even the manufacturer that is sworn to secrecy, because DARPA is a top secret, it's defense, it's advanced research project agency. So it's defense department, advanced research project agency, where all the tech is developed. So the maker, Lockheed Martin, Sikorsky, discloses what they can do back in October. So the theory is the Black Hawk helicopter, whether it had crew on board or not, was remote controlled, was hijacked. If it had a crew, it was hijacked at the last minute to steer it into the aircraft, or it had no crew on it whatsoever. And the crew was fake. or they weren't on it, or they were killed in another manner. I'm not saying that these people didn't die, but whether or not they died, as stated. But what we do know is several months ago, it was made public knowledge that Blackhawks can be remote controlled. And so if you go all the way back to 9/11, there is some evidence that that technology was used during that disaster. So, what's the mainstream media response? BBC reports combative Trump blames diversity policies after air tragedy. And then the retort, Washington Times, and this is an old article they republished, FAA turned away qualified air traffic controllers based solely on race, which we knew was happening anyway, because Trump is blaming it on DEI. And I'm blaming it on something more nefarious, obviously. But I think he knew the attack was coming, that this incident was going to be used to levy attacks on Trump and Trump administration and the reformation that the American electorate seems to be behind. Just the News is reporting Trump's outsider nominees ran the Senate gauntlet and emerged unscathed. So we're talking about, and Just the News, that's a fair assessment by the author of this article, Ben Whedon, says unscathed. I don't know if that's the case. I would like to think so. At this point, because of the resistance that these nominees are facing, I think they should all be confirmed. That's just the way I look at it. Because if they're receiving resistance from the establishment, then they definitely should be confirmed. New York Post is reporting Senate confirms former North Dakota Governor Doug Burgum as Trump's Interior Secretary. So that's a win. One American News reports Kash Patel confirmation hearing highlighted January 6th as DOJ experienced retribution and Russiagate. So I think Kash Patel held his own. I think his responses were very impressive. And he was faced with animosity from the Democrats, really, that took a belligerent tone, which I thought was unfair. If you have questions, and Kash Patel answered and said, I'm sick and tired of this innuendo, mischaracterization. So if you didn't know this is from Mediaite. Sand N-word, because Mediaite doesn't want to say the N-word. But you know what I'm talking about. Trump's FBI pick reveals shocking racist attack at hearing in explicit detail. Trump FBI director nominee Kash Patel revealed a shocking racist attack leveled against him at his confirmation hearing on Thursday, reading aloud a message in which he was called the Sand N-word and a terrorist. I believe Kash Patel is Indian, so he's not Arab. Patel has promoted conspiracy theories, denied the 2020 election, and threatened to come after perceived enemies. The media is sounding like the New York Times. We all know what Kash Patel is talking about. It's pretty, in our circles, is pretty known knowledge. Known knowledge. It's pretty accepted knowledge, I should say. One American News is also reporting Tulsi Gabbard's Senate confirmation hearing what went down. They reported on that. I'm not going to go through. If you didn't see, she received tough grilling, and she didn't want to admit that Edward Snowden was a traitor. And she's just trying to dodge the slings and arrows. The reality is is that she's been on the naughty list for some time and even on a no-fly list. And her big problem was she didn't want to call Edward Snowden, who was a whistleblower, a traitor. He's not a traitor. He's a whistleblower. And if anybody took the time to research the details of the case, you would see, did he disclose classified information? Yes. Was that information, what it disclosed was the agency's plans to spy on Americans, and in most instances warrantlessly. And if you don't remember, Clapper's response was, does the NSA spy on Americans? Clapper said, unwittingly. So they say they don't know they spy on Americans, when everybody knows that all digital information is scooped up and flagged necessary. So, Federalist is reporting Gabbard's Senate critics are more interested in protecting America's spy agencies than fixing them. This is why they're protecting the status quo. So everybody, progressives are always worried about the status quo. Here you have an administration that's trying to upend the status quo, and the progressives are against them. So they're not really progressive whatsoever. Now we have new information about what is the transgender militancy that has been whipped up among the trans community because they've been told by their allies that trans people are being attacked by Republicans. And that's just not the case. The promotion of transgenderism may be undermined, but that is not an attack on anybody. Verbal or, attack leads you to believe physical. So again, it's a mischaracterization. It's a wrong use of words. But let's go to the post-millennial article. Trans woman who sought to kill Scott Bessent considered ramming car driving knife into Trump. She said, I was thinking Trump's in LA right now for the fires. Maybe I'll catch him on the way back, ram my car into him, and just drive my knife into him, and then just die in the process. So murder, suicide, probably because of suicidal ideation brought on by medication. Looking into the story, the 24-year-old trans-identified male from Massachusetts who was arrested on Monday at the U.S. Capitol with Molotov cocktails and a knife and intended to kill Scott Bessent, who was just nominated as Treasury Secretary, has been revealed to have been planning the attack for a month and intended to hurt big players in Washington, D.C., according to the court filing from the Department of Justice seeking pretrial detention. In the filing, the DOJ said that Ryan Michael English, also known as Riley Jane English, and referred to her pronouns she and her, was planning this attack in Washington, D.C. So, and last week, we just had that arrest of the militant transgender couple in Vermont who killed a Border Patrol agent. Are you putting this shit together now? So all the worries about J6ers, and there's still, by the way, if you're a January 6th prisoner or someone that was convicted of January 6 crimes, you were still under surveillance. So stop fucking around. And there are people that are out that are involved in illicit activity that shouldn't be. So don't do it because you're under surveillance. And so as soon as you F up, it's going to be in the news. That's part of the resistance plan. Right, Just the News is reporting Trump orders Trump order pledges to prosecute teachers, administrators for facilitating gender confusion in kids. And we see how that is turning out in these adults. They're becoming militant, transgender militancy. It's a thing. That's what was involved in one of these school shootings. It was transgender militancy at that Christian school. More news from Deadline. Paramount Global in discussions with Donald Trump to settle 60 Minutes lawsuit. More news from the New York Times. Oh, so if you don't know what this Paramount Global thing is, 60 Minutes lawsuit. So Donald Trump sued CBS because they deceptively edited a Kamala Harris interview before the election that showed her giving a cogent answer to a question that she previously flubbed on. So they deceptively edited the interview to make her sound more cogent than she was. So that's election interference. So that's conspiracy. All right, New York Times, FCC chairs orders investigation into NPR and PBS sponsorships. Brendan Carr, the chairman of the Federal Communications Commission, said the inquiry could help Congress decide whether to continue funding local stations. I don't think we should. And that's a good reason not to. Basically, they're supposed to take federal grant money only, but sponsorships is like taking commercials. And so not only are they getting federal funding, well, they did under the Biden administration, but they were also getting corporate sponsorships. Like individual sponsorships are fine, but corporate sponsorships are not fine. The Federalist is reporting prolific anti-Trump FBI agent broke protocol to spearhead election warfare, says whistleblower. If you didn't know who this guy was, this is Special Agent Timothy Thibault, who we probably know. He was fired for violating the Hatch Act after Senator Grassley exposed his public anti-Trump statements, authored the initial language for Arctic Frost, the investigation that would become the Special Counsel Jack Smith's lawfare case against Trump over the 2020 election. PJ Media is reporting LA Mayor Karen Bass just confirmed the fears of the Palisades fire victims, which is she is hiring a special contractor to divide the plans to rebuild Pacific Palisades. So it'll be out of the hands of the property owners and put into this general contractor's hands. So we see where this is going already. And Karen Bass promised Trump that she was going to get rid of the regulations to get people to allow them to privately rebuild, and start clearing their lots immediately. You know she won't do that. They have an agenda there. So. Just the News is reporting GOP amendments have delayed California Democrats' attempt to Trump-proof the state. Well, it's nice to hear that California Republicans are on the case. I didn't know why they weren't on the case during the forestalled election results. I think 10 weeks afterwards, they finally had their election results. But they're moving to put up obstacles for California Democrats to Trump-proof the state, particularly when it comes to deportations and other things, including wildfire management. And also from Just the News, Republicans from local to federal levels focus on election integrity as new terms sessions begin. This is great news because this should have been done in 2020 or in 2021 before the Georgia runoff in the Senate, because Herschel Walker lost to Raphael Warnock because they didn't undo the cheating that was happening. It particularly occurs with mail-out ballots. The Just the News article goes on to say, as a new terms and legislative session begins, Republican politicians from local level to the White House are focusing on passing and implementing various election integrity efforts, from banning ranked choice voting to ending Biden bucks, which is infusion of money into Democratic neighborhoods, cities. With a trifecta of Republican government at the federal level, Republicans are prioritizing such issues as ensuring that only U.S. citizens vote in federal elections and that the private funding of U.S. elections is prohibited. Zuckbucks. Meanwhile, Republican-led state and local governments are focusing on banning the ranked choice voting system and cleaning up voter rolls, which I think is important. Also from Just the News, upstate New York sheriff could face prosecution for releasing migrant with deportation order. So this guy had a deportation order, and the New York sheriff let him go. You're not allowed to do that anymore. So, like Homan said, it's much easier for one ICE officer to go to a prison or detention and pick up an illegal immigrant and deport him, but you let him back into the community. You have to find him. You have to have a whole team. You have to do surveillance. Then you have to use a whole team to apprehend him. CNN is reporting senior FBI leaders ordered to retire, resign, or be fired by Monday. That's this Monday. Good. Christopher Wray is already gone. Kash Patel has to get in there, and the FBI needs to be gutted and investigated because they are the United States Secret Police and were engaged in illicit activity. So, and there should be a law drawn up that the FBI cannot engage in illicit activity to frame or otherwise concoct criminal schemes, whether it's the bombing of the World Trade Center in 1993 or the Governor Whitner kidnapping or what have you, anything else, or any other bombings or murders. What was that guy in Florida? The Boston bombing, the Tsarnaev friend, Ibrahim, the hell is this friggin' name? Doesn't matter now. But he was murdered by an FBI agent in his apartment. And he, like Michael Hastings, told people, I'm under surveillance from the FBI. I think they're trying to come and kill me. He said that to his friends a day before they did. Just the News reports new concerns about safety of clean energy battery storage facilities after California blaze. If you didn't know what happened here in Monterey, a massive grid-scale battery-powered energy storage facility went up in flames, spewing burnt battery material into the air. Scientists said they now have found extremely high levels of toxic heavy metals near the fire. And then the LA Times reports police say burning Tesla battery prevented them from saving driver in fatal crash. Fatal crash. The reasoning behind this is that the unintended consequences of your actions. I have nothing against electric cars. I am against mandates. I'm not against vaccines. I'm against mandates. And what folks have to understand, they push you into something, but they don't disclose the risks involved. So if your Tesla happens to catch fire, you might not be able to be rescued. New York Post reports federal court ban on local handgun sales to adults under age 21 is unconstitutional. Thank God for that. Everybody knows the age of adulthood in the United States is 18 years old. So as an adult, you should be able to buy alcohol. I don't know why that's different because the sale of alcohol is not in the Constitution. So it's not in the Bill of Rights. So the Second Amendment says that owning a gun, own and bear arms, is a right that cannot be infringed, unlike the sale of alcohol. So unless it's in the Bill of Rights, it's fair game for regulators. We talked about this yesterday. The Associated Press reports U.S. children fall further behind in reading, make little improvement in math on national exam. And the New York Times reports even progressives now worry about the federal debt. Long a focus of conservatives, the level of public borrowing is starting to concern left-leaning economists. Proposed remedies still differ radically. Not progressives, it's liberals. And they say left-leaning and they say progressives. Those are two different things. Those aren't liberals. Liberals mean you like the state to spend liberally. So it's the very nature at its root of liberal politics is even worrying the left now, but obviously because they're not in power. So now they're worried about the federal debt when they're not spending, but they're worried about the federal debt now that it's the conservatives' turn to spend. But they'll still resist the cost cutting. Speaking of finances, New York Post is saying Trump says 25% tariffs on Canada and Mexico coming Saturday. We don't need what they have. This is in response to the fact that Canada and Mexico are not bowing to Trump. What he asked them to do is to stop the illegal immigrants, illegal aliens from crossing the border, and to help interdict fentanyl, which they haven't done. Zero Hedges reporting, headline PCE inflation continues to rise, savings rate revised down again. So you can't save if you can't have money. Here's the graph showing where we are, ticked up again. If you look at the very line, it's went way down, but it's around 2%, 2.3%, around 2%. So if you understand the inflation relationship with GDP, GDP was only 2.3. I'm going to get to that just a second. New York Times, U.S. economy finished the year on a strong note, but faces hurdles, according to the New York Times. It didn't finish on a strong note, unless you're an investor. GDP grew only by 2.3% in fourth quarter, capping a more robust year than expected. That's not the story. The story is that it was 2.5 last quarter. It went down to 2.3 in the final quarter of 2024 and was mixed with inflation still being at 2. So it's too close. You need to have your GDP much higher than your inflation rate. Both under Biden. The economic growth under Biden was tepid, and inflation still hovered around 2. And the last time the Fed tried to lower interest rates when inflation was still above target, it caused inflation to go up. So they're waiting again for inflation to go down under 2. It's at 2 right now. I'm sure that'll happen, and they're going to wait for more growth under Trump. So Trump isn't going to get any help from the Fed until he turns growth around. If he gets growth up to 3%, up to 3.5, even if inflation stays at 2, the Fed might lower interest rates. Breaking news, the Associated Press, FDA approves painkiller designed to eliminate the risk of addiction associated with opioids. I have two things to say about this. They're doing this right before Trump's nomination gets into HHS. So before there's more scrutiny, we don't know if this new painkiller that isn't based on opioids is any good or if it'll ruin your kidneys like most pharmaceuticals do. What we do know is that opioids were natural. As terrible as they were, that opioids come from the poppy plant, so does heroin, and so it's naturally derived, which is a good thing. I'm not saying it's good for you, it's bad, it's addictive, ruins your kidneys. But now we're going to something synthetic. So I don't know if that's going to be helpful or it's going to hurt more. More news, China is building a world's largest military command center, 10 times bigger than the Pentagon. The facility near Beijing, 10 times the size of the Pentagon, may have been under construction since mid-2024. The Chinese, under communist rule, can build things very fast if they want to. They don't have to worry about public safety or regulators or construction workers dying or anything. Just right along. Thanks for joining me today. Don't forget to engage the channel, like, subscribe, leave a comment. Remember, you're under attack psychologically and biologically. Join me every day, Monday through Friday, 10 a.m. on Rumble. Stay hip to the trick. I'll see you next week. Respect.
I don't really care, Margaret. I don't want that person in my country, and I think most Americans agree.
I'm an American. I have rights.
You can't handle the truth.